have power for months, and as some homes have been destroyed, the International Evangelical Humanitarian Organization has established 3 hubs in the Creole state as it seeks to help dozens of communities in 3 counties impacted by the Category 4 storm. What we are seeing is that this storm really had no favorites. Todd Taylor, Samaritan's Purse Director of U.S. Disaster Relief, told the Christian Post about the storm, which made landfall on August 24th with the sustained wind speeds of up to 150 miles per hour. Hurricane Laura left 700,000 people without power across the tri-state area. It affected everybody, he said. I have not driven by a home today that didn't have at least a tree down in the yard. In the Louisiana cities of DeRidder and Jennings, Samaritan's Purse's 2 other host sites are in the beginning stages of operation. In DeRidder, volunteers began working on Sunday. Meanwhile, the organization's volunteer host site in Jennings became fully operational on Tuesday. While Samaritan's Purse is initially focusing on tree removal, Taylor said it is too early to tell what the next phase of Samaritan's Purse relief projects in Louisiana will be. There are so many things that could go into the preliminary work of a rebuild program, just based on insurance and FEMA and things like that. He said, we can't make that call until there has been sufficient time for the homeowners to figure out what their unmet needs are going to be. A man dressed in a green t-shirt, tan shorts, and light-colored baseball cap appears to be casually walking in a crosswalk on a city street in Baltimore, Maryland. Little did he know that as he crossed the intersection, he would be attacked from behind by a suspect who knocked him unconscious with bricks. Video of the depraved sneak attack was posted to social media on Monday. It also shows the man lying on the ground, laying in a pool of his own blood as another person who apparently captured the assault on camera laughs with glee. The Daily Wire reports the Instagram post of the depraved attack insinuates that the assault against the white man was radically motivated. It has the hashtags White Lives Do Not Matter and Blake Lives Matter. The assailant, also captured in the video, appears to be black according to the conservative news outlet. Police were called to the scene but were unable to find the victim. Monday morning, a detective with the Baltimore Police Department told CBN News in an email, the incident is being investigated. Unfortunately, the victim left the scene prior to officers' arrival, and the investigators have not been able to locate him. Detectives has canvassed all of our area hospitals as well, conducting a search history for assault calls in case the victim called police to another location. However, by Monday, detectives with the Baltimore PD had found the unidentified victim, who only had minor injuries and did not seek medical help. The victim is apparently not cooperating with the police. More couples, particularly newlyweds, have been seeking divorce agreements online amid the pandemic lockdowns, according to data collected by Legal Template, an organization with offices in Delaware and North Carolina that seeks to simplify the process of creating legal contracts. In a recent report, Legal Templates said they have seen a 34% increase in the sale of their divorce agreement compared to the same period in 2019. Data collected from those sales have also provided the organizations with insights from thousands of couples about why they are interested in ending their unions during the pandemic. According to the data, interest in separation during quarantine peaked on April 13th, a 57% increase compared to a month earlier on February 13th. This period was just 15 to 20 days into when most states began enforcing lockdowns and closing of businesses. More than half of their users expressing interest in divorce, 58% during the pandemic were married 5 years or less. This figure was 16% higher than in 2019. U.S. Marshals have located 25 missing children during the first 3 weeks of a new operation aimed at rescuing endangered minors throughout northern Ohio. Known as Operation Safety Net, the 25 recovered children range in age from 13 to 18 years old. A few of them are human trafficking victims, according to a statement issued by the U.S. Marshal Service last week. Working with law enforcement departments, the Marshals' operation is still ongoing as there are reportedly as many as 200 missing children in Northeast Ohio, according to WOIO. "We're trying to do our part," U.S. Marshal Pete Elliott told the television news outlets. "A number of these children have gone to the hospital after we've recovered them to get checked out. So again, this is something we take very seriously." Through the operation, the Marshals are working in coordination with the police departments in Cleveland, East Cleveland, and Newburgh Heights. In 2015, U.S. Congress passed the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, which among other things authorized the Marshals to work with local law enforcement to help find missing children. This led the Marshals creating a missing child unit that performs multiple operations aimed at helping local law enforcement locate the rescue missing minors. Last month, the Marshals reported having recovered 39 children in Georgia, ranging in age from 3 to 17. 15 of those children were said to have been victims of human trafficking. 9 suspects tied to their disappearances have been arrested. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, at-risk American children are being recruited and exploited by pimps and traffickers who force them into prostitution. Many of the children are homeless or youth that come from low-income families. This population is seen as an easy target by pimps because the children are generally vulnerable, without dependable guardians, and suffer from low self-esteem. A Justice Department statement reads, "Victims of this prostitution of children, however, come from all backgrounds in terms of race, class, and geography." The mayor of Kenosha, Wisconsin, is seeking $30 million from the state in order to help rebuild and repair businesses and other property destroyed by riots in the week following the police shooting of African-American Jacob Blake. "We are looking for $30 million to help us rebuild, to help us with the uptown and to help us with the downtown," Mayor John Antaramian said at a press conference on Sunday. "This is to help with all the people that have been negatively impacted, that we end up getting them the help that they need to get back on their feet and to enable us to the things we need to do." According to Fox 6, buildings in uptown and downtown have faced severe damage as fire officials reported that dozens of fires were set in the days following the shooting of Blake. Blake, 29 years, was shot in the back by a police officer on August 23rd during an attempted arrest in which he leaned into his car and had possession of a knife. While the peaceful protests in the streets have called for an end to injustice against African Americans, riots and looting throughout the country following the death of Floyd have negatively impacted Black-owned businesses. This includes Jessica McLean, the owner of the Black and White Look optical eyewear store in Washington, D.C. She said that about 90% of her store's inventory was smashed because of the looting in the wake of Floyd's death in late May. "They pretty much use bricks and hammers," she told WTOP. On Wednesday, President Donald Trump will visit Kenosha, something that concerns Antaramian. "Realistically, from our perspective, our preference would have been for him not to be coming at this point in time," Antaramian told NPR on Sunday. All presidents are always welcome and campaign issues are always going on, but it would have been, I think, better had he waited to have for another time to come. A Washington, D.C. committee formed by the mayor has recommended changing the names of schools and government buildings and even called for the federal government to remove, relocate, and contextualize a group of federal memorials and monuments, including the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, and the Benjamin Franklin statue. The DC Faces reports found that the working group's research showed that more than 70% of the monuments named in the district are named for white men, many of whom were not district residents. I look forward to reviewing and advancing their recommendations, Mayor Muriel Bowser posted to Twitter. Among the federal statutes and memorials listed are Christopher Columbus, Columbus Fountain, Benjamin Franklin Statute, Andrew Jackson Statue, Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson Memorial, George Mason Memorial, Francis Griffith Newlands Memorial Fountain, Albert Pike Statute, George Washington Monument, George Washington Statute. Reaction from Republicans was swift. Hey DC, they're not your monuments to rename or remove, tweeted Senator Tom Cotton. They're America's monuments. The committee said there were 5 factors in its conclusions. Did the person participate in slavery? Was the person involved in systematic racism? Did the person support oppression? Was the person involved in a supremacy agenda? And most notably, did the person violate the city's current human rights law? Just how secure will voting be during the November election? President Trump has raised and continued to raise fraud concerns over universal mail-in balloting. But the biggest threat could actually come from foreign tampering. U.S. Attorney General William Barr first floated the idea about foreign election interference in a New York Times interview last June, saying it is a worrisome issue. Barr said there are a number of foreign countries that could easily make counterfeit ballots, put names on them, and send them in, and it will be very hard to sort out what's happening. President Trump raised similar concerns about Chinese and Russian mail-in ballots interfering during an August 11th interview with Sean Hannity. Trump administration critics say foreign ballot tampering is highly unlikely because specific codes are used to identify ballots, and ballots 3D designs vary from state to state. 3D designs vary from state to state. That makes counterfeiting on a massive scale extremely difficult, if not impossible. Other methods of election meddling are more likely. Utah Senate Mitt Romney is concerned about domestic and foreign electronic voting hacking. There have been efforts to do so in the past. If that were successful, we would really have no way in some states to know what the right number was, Romney explained. China may pose the greatest threat. On August 7th, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNY, announced China does not want President Trump re-elected, and Beijing has been expanding its influence efforts ahead of November 2020 to shape the policy environment. So perhaps the easiest way for China or anyone else to sway the November election would come through propaganda and disinformation. That could pose the biggest threat to an uninformed American electorate now reliant on social media as its main source of information. Saudi Arabia announced on Wednesday that it will now allow flights from all countries, including Israel, to use its airspace to fly to and from the United Arab Emirates. The kingdom released a vaguely worded statement that does not explicitly mention Israel, but comes just days after Saudi Arabia allowed an Israeli commercial plane to use its airspace to make the first ever direct flight to the UAE. The flight carried Israeli and American delegation to the Emirati capital, where they worked to finalize the US brokered peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Although Saudi Arabia is not ready to normalize ties with Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the Saudi decision another tremendous breakthrough. Netanyahu thanked White House advisor Jared Kushner, who led this week's American delegation to the UAE, for making the flights possible. He also added that there will be a great deal more good news to come. Kushner visited Bahrain and Saudi Arabia on Tuesday in a bid to convince Israel's Arab neighbors to make peace with the Jewish state. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain appeared to show hesitation about establishing diplomatic ties with Israel in the absence of an official Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement. College campuses have been training camps for radicals and are the source of the rioting in American cities, according to academics and college officials interviewed by CBN News. Portland State philosophy professor Peter Bogosian says college campuses are without question the source of the woke movement that inspires the rioters in American cities. 100% of it, absolutely, categorically, and unequivocally, he said, the universities are cranking out utter madness. College professors have been among those arrested in the rioting. Professor Erin Thompson at the City University of New York tweeted this advice to rioters pulling down statues: use chain instead of rope and it will go faster. I've actually been there in the midst of many of these riots. I've seen it up close and personal, and many of the rioters are indistinguishably from the people you see on campus, says Cabot Phillips, editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. Because there have been so many consequences when they do go out on these campuses and riot and protest, they've been able to test out what works. They've been able to see how they can create the most destruction, get the most outrage, and then carry out into cities around the country. The radical movement that used to be confined to some academic departments now dominates whole campuses. Carl Riverside, Professor Reza Aslan, said all Trump backers are white nationalist terror supporters who must be eradicated from society. University of California, Santa Barbara religion professor Timothy Schnickler tweeted that if he had a time machine, he would go back and assassinate Jesus. Bogosian says a woke ideology is the dominant moral orthodoxy in virtually every campus that now spilled out into everything. It's tech, it's media, it's CNN. It's completely woke. Cornell law professor William Jacobson, who monitors campuses' radicalism on his website Legal Insurrection, says, "We never thought the craziness, the absolute insanity that we saw on campus would amount to anything, and that we didn't realize, and what we did not realize is that the campus moved into the culture. The students who were weaned and indoctrinated on radical ideologies and racial politics in the worst ways would then move on to corporations and move into journalism. They are the people deciding at Twitter and Facebook and YouTube who gets silenced and who gets banned." Jacobson has been censored by his dean and formally denounced by 21 Cornell faculty members for speaking out against the rioting and BLM movement. But the most tragic case on campus persecution on conservatives is UNC Wilmington criminology professor Mike Adams. White House advisor Jared Kushner visited Bahrain and Saudi Arabia on Tuesday in a bid to convince Israel's Arab neighbors to make peace with the Jewish state. Kushner flew to the Gulf capitals after wrapping up historic talks with Israeli and Emirati leaders in Dubai, centered on finalizing Israel's US-brokered peace deal with the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain appeared to show hesitation about following the UAE in establishing diplomatic ties with Israel without an official Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement. Kushner met Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, who praised the steadfast historic stances of the United Arab Emirates in ensuring Palestinian rights, the state-run BNA News agency said. Kushner expressed optimism that other Arab countries will soon establish formal ties with Israel, even in the absence of an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. Bahrain's king also said regional stability rests on Saudi Arabia, suggesting that his country will not make a deal with Israel until the Saudi kingdom acts first. Kushner later met with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, where they discussed the prospects for the peace process in the region and the need to resume negotiations between the Palestinian and Israeli sides to achieve a just and lasting peace, the state-run SPA said. Saudi Arabia spearheaded the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, a proposal for the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The initiative calls for normalizing relations between Israel and her Arab neighbors in exchange for Israel withdrawing its borders to the 1967 armistice lines and the resettlement of Palestinian refugees back to the land. Both of these conditions have historically been non-starters for Israel. As Kushner's meetings drew to a close, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei issued a televised address blasting the UAE's recognition of Israel as a stain on the country. The United Arab Emirates committed treachery against either the Islamic world or Arab nations and regional countries, as well as Palestine. Khamenei said, "The treason will not last for long." Palestinian leaders have also condemned the deal as a stab in the back by a major regional player. Israel and UAE are both suspicious of Iran's nuclear ambitions, and an Emirati official denounced Khamenei's comments. The path to peace and prosperity is not through incitement and hate speech. Foreign Ministry official Jamal al-Mushkara said, "That kind of rhetoric is counterproductive to peace in the region." Residents in Louisiana are facing crucial shortages of basic supplies after Hurricane Laura slammed the area last Thursday. More than 17,000 linemen from 29 states are working to restore power for thousands of people who have been without air conditioning during some of the hottest days of the year. Cars were backed up for miles as members of the United States military handed out ice, water, meals, and tarps to nearly 180,000 people. One man was trapped in his home for days, hoping that help would come soon. "We lost the roof to our house," he said. "We were trapped in the house for 4 days. Our brother-in-law came and cut us out with a chainsaw yesterday." Operation Blessing trucks have been in Lake Charles, Louisiana for days with volunteers who are ready to help victims. They brought power tools and equipment to cut and remove debris. The Trump administration will be granting $1 million to the Kenosha Police Department in support of their efforts to defuse the current unrest in the city, according to the remarks made by President Donald Trump while visiting Kenosha on Tuesday. Trump told reporters that he will also be granting $4 million to small businesses recovery for those businesses that have suffered damages from the riots, and $42 million statewide to advance a law enforcement efforts. We must give far greater support to our law enforcement. It's all about giving them additional support. These are great people. These are brave people. They're fighting to save people that they never met before in many cases, and they're incredible. We must really be thankful that we have them, and we have to help them do their jobs, Trump said. The president traveled to Kenosha to observe the damage from the riots that followed the shooting of Jacob Blake on August 23rd. Following the tour of the damages, Trump held a roundtable conference joined by Attorney General William Barr, Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wold, Senator Ron Johnson, Congressman Brian Steele, Kenosha County Sheriff David Beth, Kenosha Police Chief Daniel Mishkins, and others. During the conference, Trump asked a pastor to pray for the current situation in Kenosha. Father, we ask you to forgive us all when we've strayed from our ways and where we've not acknowledged your word. We ask that you would continue to cause the nation to be one nation under God. Pastor James Ward of Inside Church prayed. Trump described the root of the violence as a message driven by the reckless far-left politicians. Some 75% of Christian churches and organizations that applied for receivable forgivable loans under the federal government's Corona Relief Program for small businesses, known as the Paycheck Protection Program, say the loans helped keep their operations fully staffed, and many of them have already been forgiven. A recent survey by Vander Bloemen, citing data collected over several months from 900 churches and Christian organizations, reveals how crucial the relief program has been for the survival of Christian operations. The survey found that 76.09% of churches in the survey had service attendance below 1,000, while 58.85% attracted less than 500. A majority of churches, 74%, also had annual budgets of less than $2 million. More than half of the Christian churches and organizations, 61%, received less than $150,000, and 85% of them received less than $349,000. The government hoped the economic impact of COVID-19 would be temporary and wanted to improve job stability by enabling organizations to continue paying their employees rather than having the government pay for unemployment, Vander Bloemen reported. This definitely worked out for everyone involved. With very little turnover in Christian organizations, they were able to maintain staff and continue to help their communities during a time of crisis. Samaritan Purse volunteers help victims in the aftermath of Hurricane Laura. Video of a heinous brick sneak attack on man goes viral. Complete depravity. U.S. Marshals rescue 25 missing children in Ohio during Operations Safety Net. Today's news was reported by CBN, The Christian Post, and Christian Headlines. My name is Russell Sarup, and this is Kingdom News. Until next time, do have a blessed evening.